They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Program to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed. Disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight on Rogueways, we are blessed to connect with a woman after my own heart who is aware and highly functioning on all of the levels of conspiracy, consciousness, connection, and community, and who brings the genius level of conception to the crossroads of our minds and hearts, where we can dive with her into the deepest wells and come out still breathing on the other side. Emily Moyer is the host of Conspiracy Cocktail, Strange Mosaic, Words, Matrix Mash, and more. A nutrition consultant, a life coach, a storyteller, and a longtime junkie of streaming outside the boxes, voices, and concepts in order to support our ever-evolving inner standings. Emily, welcome to Rogueways, and how are you doing tonight?
That was a lovely introduction. I'm doing great. It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much.
It's really good to have you here, because you were gracious enough to host me on your show not that long ago, and it was so nice to get to know you and connect with you more, and I am so excited that you are coming back now to Rogueways. We can give you the honor as well, and I do just want to shout out to all the people out there that The Key of Transformational Healing, the newest book, is now available from me directly. If you want a signed copy, you can grab it in the Rogueways store. I have plenty of copies available for you, so come and get them when you are ready. And Emily, the pointless question of the episode, I don't know if you'll find it very pointless or not, but I wanted to ask you, what do you think space is?
I think it's a mind control program. Ooh. Especially the secret space, right? The secret space, is definitely a mind control program. Yeah, I think it definitely doesn't exist in the way it's been described to us. And I'm not sure it even exists at all, right? And that actually was probably like one of the early main topics that I covered back when I first started co-hosting Off Planet Radio with Randy, aptly named Off Planet, right? He for years and years had dug into things related to space and UFOs and aliens. And at the bottom of each one of those rabbit holes, you find MK Ultra and my labs and, basically like anechoic chambers with people in them being blasted with frequencies and being told they're going to space. And why would you need to do all of this if there actually was one, right? So, I think that it's a construct that's been created to keep people looking up and away instead of downwards and inwards, right? And it's very, very effective. And it's also like a massively good cover for wasting a lot of money on warfare and dumb shit and tracking and surveillance and whatnot. So, yeah.
Further levels of mind control as well.
Further. Yes.
Did you find that Randy back then when you were doing Off Planet Radio or other people have been extremely upset when you say that? They're very, I don't know about him specifically, but especially people who look into this a lot and it's kind of their bread and butter and they love it. They're really attached to space being real and aliens being physical and the ships actually having come here from, Zargon B or whatever.
So I think for Randy, and it's interesting, I had a nice conversation with Randy yesterday. We're still really good friends, even though we don't do shows together anymore. He was constantly doing this in his radio broadcasting career because he started as a Christian, Christian radio host.
Oh, wow.
Right. And he found that the kind of answers he got from that, though some of them, because he was really into much more weird Christianity and a little bit esoteric and whatever, as he is with everything, that the answers he was getting did not satisfy the experiences that he had, right? Which, he had things that seemed to match abduction or implanting or alien kind of stuff. And so he had to sort of leave that aside, or as he started exploring other things, his audience and his former co-hosts left him aside, right? As he moved into examining some of this other stuff. And then the same process, right? Like that became his new reality. And the further he dove into that, eventually he began to find himself circling a drain. And like the only answer to sort of get out of that cul-de-sac or that like pan, the shower pan at the bottom or whatever, was to start questioning that. And I think that, I don't want to speak for him, but I think that where he got to with this is not so much that like, it's impossible that aliens exist. We can't be the only game in town. Like it's highly arrogant of us to think that we are. But this idea that they're like something so different than us, and they come from very, very far away, as opposed to just like they're either similar to us and exist here, but on a different frequency, or they're like, you know, to the extent that they're far different than us, they're like somehow representative of the parts of ourselves that we have tried to discard or are refusing to integrate or whatever. And that these are sort of disembodied spirits or disincarnate spirits that attract to those parts of ourselves that we push aside and that hide sort of just outside of our vision, like we do from ourselves. Right. And so I think that like, you know, he hasn't, I don't think he would say that there's no other intelligences or beings, but I don't know that he would, you know, thinks about them the same way he did in 2007 or 8 or whatever, right? Like, I think that like he has found a pretty good, like either internal answer, or if there is an external answer, it's an external applied mind control answer for many of the alien questions. And as far as the UFO questions, I think we're just dealing with a physics that we don't understand that very likely does come from people on our own planet who, you know, it gives them many advantages to have people think it's coming from outer space. And so not that it couldn't come from something outside, because I think we're inside of something, and it isn't that nothing exists outside of that. But it's like, you know, this idea that like the purpose of everything is to come in here and bother us is like ridiculous to me. I don't know. But yeah, some people don't like it, right? Like some people, I'm sure you get that, right? Like, you know, if people are really sure of a narrative, and whether that narrative be the Republican or the Democrat Party, the Christian or Jewish or Muslim holy book, or whether that be like a narrative of Bigfoot or aliens or terrorists or whatever it is, right? And, you know, you're insisting that like, you know, maybe it's just like a, you know, overcooked idea in your head. They don't really take too kindly to that. And so, you know.
Well, that's what I find so many of people in our community have something like that's like their thing. And when you like start to question it, they're like, no. That's not where we're going here. And so I wonder if you have found any of those in yourself.
Me?
Yeah. You seem exceptionally open-minded, but because I love it when I find them in myself. I'm like, ooh, there's one I never, ever thought about.
So I think, and this is something that I'm just like, I guess I've always known this about myself, but I wouldn't have put it in this kind of language. But I've heard, like, because of a few things I found out about my family, and then something Robert said recently, Robert Phoenix, or, you know, our mutual friend, Robert. And then someone else kind of suggested recently as well, like I'm able to walk right up to the schizophrenic edge and kind of dip the toe in and then pull back. And because of that, and because of the experiences with, you know, all kinds of drugs, but, you know, psychedelic drugs and methamphetamine and whatever, and the awareness that like that shit can look crazy to people, I've always been cautious about like, you know, believing whatever my mind is telling me in the moment, right? Like, sure, I have favorite ideas and favored narratives and stuff, but I don't know that I have like a paradigm that I need to insist is true. Like in terms of like through lines on things, like, you know, like I love the idea, like probably the one that I'm the most attached to is like the idea that the tennis means more than we think it does. There's this synchromistic sort of archetypical battle taking place that decides the fate of the world, blah, blah, blah. But I know that's ridiculous. I like it. You know what I mean? And it turns out to be true sometimes more often than I even think it's going to be in terms of predictions. But in terms of like, there has to be aliens, or there has to be Bigfoot, or God has to be real, or there has to be many universes or just one. Like, I don't know, there's like, I can rearrange my story around whatever the truth is to make it entertaining and to make the parts that were meaningful, like sometimes it's just, I think we talked about this when you were with me, turning the diamond a little bit. It's not that like the experience doesn't matter if something doesn't turn out to be true, because if you just change the angle that you're looking at it from, oh, it actually does matter. It just shines a light on a different part of the dance floor than I thought it would, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very well said. It's this is part of why they teach people in, when you're receiving counseling or psychiatric treatment about reframing, right? And they're like, look, here's this thing that happened to you. Like, what's another way you can look at it that makes it easier for you to deal with in this moment? And this is what people who are trip mothers are the master of, right? Like, oh, you're freaking out? Well, here's this magic pillow. And when you hug it, it gives you love. So, oh, now you're having a good trip. Like, whatever it is, you can just like, here, twist it a little bit. Now we're shining a light somewhere else and everything is fine, right? And so that's actually a very powerful tool to have at your disposal to be able to do that and to be able to bring things into your narrative in a way that is neither super attached, it is this way, nor is it so detached from reality in your experience that you're in denial of what is actually happening, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I think that helped me to learn how to do that was like back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was really into going to raves. And I was like a break dancer. And so I was dancing in the circle quite a bit, right? And over the course of the period of time that was happening, where I was like kind of doing that a lot, I also picked up some other dance styles, right? And sometimes like your rhythm slightly gets broken, but everyone is watching you. So you have to find a way to like work it out without anybody noticing that like, oh, it didn't go the way you were supposed, like that it was supposed to go, right? It's a little different than when like you mess up. Like I was a gymnast too. When you fall off the beam, it's obvious, everyone knows. But like with the dance stuff, like if you can find a way to like make the awkward move look like you did it on purpose and continue anyway or whatever, like sometimes that ends up like working out for you, right? And you can kind of, sometimes you end up like inventing your own move that people think looks cool. So it's like, go with it, Yeah,
I love that. Well, speaking of heavy drug use, which we both share in our past, I wonder what your thoughts are about, it seems to me like a lot of people who and I'm not trying to say this because I'm just trying to give us both huge compliments and say that we're so amazing, but we are. But I just find that people who are really smart tend to become heavy drug addicts. People who see a lot of truth tend to become drug addicts. I'm not saying that every drug addict was this very bright, intelligent person, but a lot of us who were bright enough to see and then saw how very, very hopeless it was in this world. We're like, meh, I may as well do like a lot of drugs. Do you feel like that's part of why you went into drug use?
Yeah. So I think that there's a couple of things, like I understand more and more about it, like the farther I get from it. Right. So I think, yes, definitely like what you're saying, like I kind of heavy drug use. I found it found me. I don't know how the story goes during a time when I was starting to have a lot of questions about a lot of things. And some of them were internal questions and others were about things going on in the world. And the path that I took at the time that I took it was not a very populated one informationally. So there was no community that sprung up around like COVID or some of these things that have happened. It was, 15, 17 years ago. And like, I was not as taken with like 9/11 and stuff like that as some people were, though I definitely was interested and did the research. I was very, very taken with the topic of mind control. And at that time, it sounded like battier than our government did 9/11 or something to people. So I was walking that path alone and I found my way to a lot of the trafficking and, really weird, dark, very bizarre stuff, like stuff that some of the Pizzagate stuff doesn't even touch on in terms of like, right. And I think it became like I was equally fascinated and horrified. And so the drugs became like anesthetizing well enough, like kind of numbing so that I could get through the information. So there was that aspect of it in terms of dealing with the pain of what's going on in the world. And then the other part was just, there is a more, I don't know how to say this, if it's a different reality or a more complete reality that exists all around us, just outside of the frequency that we are generally attuned to. And once you've been there, you can't deny it's not there. And so you're kind of like, it's kind of like when you were little and you would like find a good candy store, right? In the neighborhood, like somewhere like in your friend's neighborhood. And then suddenly you're like, I'm going on a bike ride and, you know, whatever, right? Like you want to keep going back. And like, it's almost like you're trying to build like a model in your mind, because you know that when you're not high, or when you one day this comes, the ride that you're having with the drugs comes to the end, you're not going to be able to see that stuff as clearly anymore. And so like, you know, but it's still going to be there. And so it's kind of like if you memorize like the way to the bathroom in the dark, right? Like, so I think some of that was going on. And then just the level of connections and like the way that my brain was firing, like the synapses were firing with all that stuff and making connections between this story and this conspiracy and that conspiracy, that can be as addicting as the drug is itself. And I think that's the same addiction that drives the push towards dehumanizing technology for a lot of people, right? Because it's like, whoa, like my mind can do this and this and this, and suddenly I can see a reality that no one else can see, and da 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 da. And I often think that, I was thinking about this today because I had a feeling we were going to talk about this, right? Like I think one of the only differences between like a drug addict and somebody who has like extrasensory perception and is sort of genius, or someone who has access to high technology, or someone who has access to the drug legally, and so they're not concerned about what trouble they might be in, is just that it's the law, right? Because, you know, in the military, they give them meth, and they wouldn't give them meth if it made their judgment poor or their visual acuity not accurate and stuff like that. Hitler took it. We all know about that. But my guess would be that a lot of the tech that is off the books probably is looking into that realm, or is able to create vibrational fields to put someone or something in that realm. And so they're operating free of concern. When you or I were in there, like, you know, always, unless you're just like, maybe in the first few times you ever did drugs, there wasn't a paranoia that was there. But the longer you do it, the more like, you know, it's the stigma and the legalities around it create a scenario where you can't report what you're finding to other people without thinking that they're thinking you're crazy. And also you're wandering off into areas that you theoretically aren't supposed to be in, even though they're sort of interdimensional in nature. Right. And, you know, I wonder if one were doing that without the worry of like, if my parents find out I'm going to be in trouble, or if the police catch me, I'm going to jail or whatever, like, would we be able to close a lot of the loops that we weren't able to close because of the conditions under which we were visiting those realms? Right. And there are people who are doing that because they're not worried about that.
Yeah, there's a use for all of these substances, and they all can take you somewhere different and allow you a different perspective, like you were saying earlier. And have you ever interacted with entities on any of your trips or non-trips, actually?
Okay, so I've definitely like seen like the black shadow man guy with the hat. And I've definitely seen like the spiders that seem to be sort of like interdimensional and technological in nature. And I definitely have had a lot of the sort of black particle tech kind of moving through the room kind of experiences, but not some of the like really, not some of the really, really dark stuff that a lot of people talk about. And I think some of that for me probably comes from the fact that I was not raised with religion, so I don't have a fear of that. So my mind isn't looking for that. Also, I wasn't raised with religion, so I'm not looking for God or angels or anything on the other side with like love and light. I don't have that experience either. Right. For me, it was generally much more around like geometrics and colors and like sounds and vibrations and light and stuff like that.
Yeah. I get fascinated by, and I haven't done DMT or ayahuasca, but I get fascinated by the ubiquity of like the machine elves, right? Mm-hmm. This is the second time this has come up for me today. And I'm, you know, and I'm like, well, they have to have a purpose, and they have to have some aspect of whatever we want to call objective existence. If this many people completely separate without having heard of them describe the same thing that we have come to know and call the machine elves, you know, because this existed before this was like a popularized internet heavy, you know, experience. This was still reported over how long? I don't know. It seems like forever. So that's interesting to me, right? And then some of the experiences I had have I've never met anyone that has had any kind of being encounters like them. Like one time when I was doing peyote, like a giant slug-like being just like dropped down. It was like hanging from a string and was like talking to me without a mouth and without sound. And we were having a conversation before I realized, wait, I'm talking to like a weird slug thing. Like, what are you? And then he was like, oh, time to go, and like left. I was like, what the hell was that? Like, that isn't evil. It's not good. It was neutral. It was not any being I've heard of before. And so that's really weird to me too. And I just wonder if there are, some sorts of a purpose that they have, these things, whichever types they are, that they have like a job to do or like a role that they play, or if there is objective reality to them, if they actually exist,
Okay, so I there's a lot of things I can do with that. So let's have some fun here. So first of all, I've never done DMT either, in terms of like, it's never been offered to me like at a party or someone come over with it. I do think that it was commonly used in projects when I was a kid and things that I was involved in, but it's different when something you don't know you're doing it than when you know you're doing it, because when people describe their DMT experiences, it all sounds very, very familiar to me. It sounds like, it doesn't sound like, yeah, it just does. But I've done a lot of mushrooms, right? And lots of acid and other psychedelic kind of drugs, and had plenty of other visual experiences as well that haven't involved psychedelics. But I feel very fortunate that I had a couple of psychedelic experiences before I ever heard of Terence McKenna, because I think if you hear like Terence McKenna is such an amazing, he's the orator of that space. Like, he is absolutely correct when like the mushrooms hired him to work for them, right? Kind of thing. Like, he's like, all those entheogens. It's hard to not, if you've never had the experience and then you hear someone tell a story so grand, to not carry that into the experience for yourself. So I already knew what my like mushroom and acid and whatever landscape was before I ever heard him talk.
Me too.
Right. So that, like, when he started talking about the machine now, like I could get down with all that he was saying about like the flowers and the geometry and like some of the nonsense with syntax that kind of comes to mind. But for me, there hadn't really been machine elves or even anything that was like that kind of being. But later, like as I got into doing bigger and bigger doses of mushrooms and doing them not at parties, like initially all my psychedelics were done at raves or warehouse parties. And later I started doing bigger doses, either by myself at home or with somebody else or in nature. And I started to look at the things I was seeing. The landscape was the same, but kind of like we talked before, if I twisted my head and looked at them from a different angle, I could see that, oh, it did look like a face, or it looked like a big body, or I started like, when I look at some of the psychedelic art that some people, including Alex Gray, but there's others who are more precise to kind of like what I see, I could like, okay, yes, I do see that, but it like, that wasn't I didn't see the being or the person or the entity first. For me, I was always much more taken with the geometry and the colors. And then the longer I looked at it, it's kind of like those optical illusion pictures. Then the thing behind it started to show itself. But I also noticed like that a lot of the stuff, they are faces, but they're made up of little geometries and stuff like that. And sometimes they're made up of things that look like little pieces of candy. If you look at them out of one eye and you look at the other eye, it's like, it looks like skulls and something evil. And then you look at them straight on and it looks like the tips of colored pencils. And right. So all of this stuff is like morphable, and it's kind of meeting you where you're at. Right. So I think there's like all of these energies around us, and they're archetypes, like they've created archetypes to represent like certain energies or energy fields. And humans are always wanting to personify things, because we somehow think that like things are more important if there's like a person or a being or an entity attached to them than if they just are a triangle or a geometry or whatever stacked on top of each other. So I think that it's just kind of, part of whatever your story is, like however you see things. If you think that like the wind is a god that's, sending destruction your way, then you're going to see that god. If you think the wind is just the wind, you're going to be like, that cool air feels nice or whatever, right? So I think there's that part of it. The second part is, there's a guy I know named Benito. Benito, if you hear this, hello.
Hi, Benito.
He's awesome. Benito's an interesting character. He did a lot of salvia divinorium, I can never say divinorium,
Yeah.
salvia divinorium, I think is how you say it. He went through a period of time where he was doing it a lot, right? And he would go to this realm that was like static on the TV realm. And there would be beings there that would say things like, you're not supposed to be here, but as long as you're here, let me show you around. And show him how this field of static was made up of every thought that has ever been had, is being had now, or will be had, right? And it's this endless field of sort of static from which these beings would kind of emerge. So I think there's like this sort of background components of like the building blocks of reality, and they're made up of language or thoughts or whatnot. And then certain things attract to them and sort of push them forward and kind of get represented as sort of a being. And some of the stories he told me about some of the spaces he went into were kind of fascinating. But this static field that is available for like anything to sort of emerge through. And then the last one, and this goes to your slug, is Laura and I were doing mushrooms out at this place called Hidden Passage Ranch, sort of between Palm Springs and Joshua Tree. Right. And we were sitting outside at night, and we were doing mushrooms, and like we were kind of like, it was very internal in the heavy part of the trip. And then we kind of opened our eyes and we were looking around us, and it was weird. There was this wall right in front of where we were sitting, and we're like, this is weird. Like, we were out here today laying out in the sun. There was no wall here. There was like a wall that looked like it had graffiti on it that of like jungle animals, but they almost looked alive. Right? Like, it was like, this is like, we would have noticed if this was here, and we both saw it. And like, it felt like a lion or a tiger or something coming at us. Like a Lion King, but a little more real looking kind of thing. Right? We both saw the same thing. And we have very different backgrounds and ways that we see things in our trip. So that we were seeing the same thing was kind of interesting. And in the morning, after it was all over, we noticed that there was an electrical line there. Right. That's all it was like an electrical line, and then like another thing coming up like this. So there's these energies moving and coming together, and it created this sort of background that something could emerge on. And you have to wonder, like, did you ever watch Twin Peaks?
Yes.
Because you see the newer updated season?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I'll remember.
Okay, so they used the electrical wires to travel between dimensions, basically like time travel through the electric wires. So it makes me wonder if like hundreds or thousands of years ago in that location, those animals were there, and they're still able to sort of come through by riding the sort of electricity, right? And where those 2 points came together, the one like this, there was this kind of explosion of something that didn't seem to belong there, but was like fascinating for a while.
Yeah. Well, that just reminds me of like 5G and what they say they're doing with quantum computing and with CERN and all of this. And they say they're trying to bring these intelligences through. And if intelligences can travel through and emerge from these fields that we create, like, why wouldn't they be using those fields to do whatever, contact whoever, whichever entities or intelligences might exist? And I'll add that Marker 113 in the YouTube chat says that, fuzzy TV static land sounds like the ether. Like, it's another description of the ether. Yeah. And this is what I love too. Like, everything, this is why I don't like when people get really attached to any given thing or any given definition even, right? Because everything is actually just everything. And that is the ether, right? And another way to describe the ether is to say it's a state of plasma, perhaps, right? And we can go into every single type of way of looking at the world and have some sort of description for that. For something that is all things that anything can emerge through, right? We can get into the spiritual dimension from it, or we can get really materialistic about it. And it's the same thing. And it's like how I keep bringing this up lately, but people who do remote viewing, like, they hate it often if you say like, oh, you're psychic. They're like, fuck you. I am not. I am a remote viewer. Like, it's somehow different or better. And I'm like, it's just a different word for the same thing, though. Like, this is what psychics and clairvoyants are doing. It's the same thing. We have infinite ways of describing these experiences.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you too. Like, I find the formalities around remote viewing to be rather annoying. Nobody who like teaches formal remote viewing right? And there's a couple of different teachers out there who have different techniques, but I think part of the reason there's so much formality around it is because they really want it to be respected, and they always are referring to how, well, the military's used it, so it has to be real, and the other stuff we don't know, and right? But no one has been able to explain to me why writing coordinates on a piece of paper, putting them in an envelope and not letting somebody see them would make them see a certain thing. Like I remote view, I don't do any of that shit. Like, I don't understand, like, so, right. So when I ask them, I'm like, can you explain to me what those two things have anything to do with each other? Unless the people are psychic, right? And so they're picking up on the coordinates, even though you're saying that this is a blind experiment, they're not actually seeing what they are. So these same people that are saying they're not psychic are proving that these people are psychic based on their experiment that they're doing, right? So I think the most important remote views are spontaneous. Right. Like, I think that I do think that targeted remote viewing is possible. Right. But I don't think there's any way you can target something for viewing without affecting it. When suddenly you are just looking at something and you don't know why, it's more like being a fly on the wall, and you're more likely to get good information than when someone knows something knows it's being probed. The most interesting remote views I've ever had have been like, I'm just laying on the bed, like in that space between waking and sleeping, and suddenly I'm looking at something going, what the fuck am I looking at? And then like a week or 10 days or 3 weeks later, I'll hear like a news report about something, and it's literally like the situation that I was looking at those weeks back.
Yeah.
Right.
That's way more pure. This is why I do a lot of work with people, and it's whatever you want to call it. We could just give it the label of psychic types of things, right? Mm-hmm. And I really don't want to know anything before I start. Like, they often want to tell me, like, here's all the things going on. Here's what I want to know. Here's my questions. I'm like, stop. Just like, let me go in blind and see, because I know it's more pure that way. I know that we're going to get a better hit or whatever that way. Whereas if you give me all of this, now my mind's just like, oh, this person likes lions. They said so. Now let's talk about lions. I'm like, that's not actually helpful, right? Yeah. It's that blind way of doing it is, why would they not recognize that in their supposedly scientific mindset, right? And you're putting, with the remote viewing specifically, like another wall in between the person and the goal. You're like, well, you don't just have to look at the goal. You have to look into this envelope, see the coordinates, translate that, and then look at the goal. Like, well, just go to the goal. Anyway.
Yeah. So I agree with you about the front loading list stuff, right? Like I mean, sometimes when you work with people like I do, like you do, we probably work differently, but similarly, right? Like, I want to know like a very few things, right? Like, I want to, because, no matter what, anybody you or I work with, they know way more about us than we know about them.
That's true.
Right. And so, like, give me like a few threads to pull on, but the less is more. Right. And sometimes, like, I'll feel rude when I do it. Sometimes they'll start telling me the story. It's like, stop. Like, you said 3 sentences. I already know, like, right. Like, but sometimes they want to tell you. Right. And so it's like trying to find that line between, like, not like pooping in the punch bowl as far as like getting a good read, and also like respecting that this person really wants to tell you their version of the story. Right.
Which we all do too, and that is something that we all need. I also, when you're talking about like the faces coming out and the things you see and the patterns and everything, and is it pareidolia? I never know if I'm saying it right, but that humans tend to see faces in things. Is pareidolia, I think, is what it's called. And people will say that, right? Like, how do you know it's not just our propensity to project into this and to see this? And how do you know you're not just, when you're doing psychic things, you're interacting with intelligences or whatever? How do you know it's not just your subconscious, like, feeding you this shit? And to me, it's like the same as the placebo thing, right? Someone recently was like, oh, Brown's gas, like, that's just a blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm healing with it. So even if it is bullshit, the placebo is so good, I'll keep fucking doing it forever because it's working really well. So 100%. My question is, like, why should I care if it's pareidolia or placebo? Isn't it still just as effective for me? And do you have an opinion on that?
Totally. So I think we're always looking for ourselves, really, right? Like, we're constantly like, you're not looking for yourself until the first time you see yourself in the mirror as a kid, or it's the first time you see the reflection in the window or in a puddle, right? And then you're sort of always looking for it, even if you don't know, right? Like, you're looking for yourself. And like, I don't want to say that I'm of the firm belief, but I spend a lot of time with the idea that I'm actually the only one in the entire world. And that everything, including you, and right, it's just things that I've sort of created to like reflect like my own thoughts and like my own both distortions, like in a good, like distortions and like, you know, good, like, you know, expanded, wonderful imagination kinds of things back to me in ways that I can sort of observe, critique, decide what I'm going to integrate, what I'm not. Like every day I have like these, I mean, my life just gets weirder and weirder, right? But there's never, I'm almost never having, you know, any experience that catches my attention that doesn't answer some question I was pondering for myself in some way earlier. Sometimes like it's completely like in a different, like, you know, it'll feed back to you like the same ideas or the same words, but in a totally different context than you were thinking about them in. But then it's like, okay, like you know, maybe what I was thinking was almost it, but if I adjust my thinking, you know, whatever, then it sort of makes sense. So, you know, like I had, did you seen those Javier videos from Valencia, Spain, where it's like the guy is saying, it's these TikTok videos and people kept sending them to me. He's saying he was in, this was like 6 months back, right? He was in Valencia, Spain in 2027, and he's the only person alive in the world. And he's got all these videos of him walking around, going into grocery stores, nobody there, going into police stations, nobody there, like all the cars are empty, like everything, right? Like, and he's, you know, communicating with people via TikTok and doing little exercises where he'll tell one of his TikTok viewers to go put a set of keys in this plaza, right? And then he'll go there and he'll like pick them up, and, you know, they're doing things, right? So it could be, it definitely could be technology, but the idea and what it does for your mind is interesting.
Yeah.
And it made me, you know, I was doing a show with Nish and we were talking about this. And a couple of years back, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. And I've had this kind of experience before where like, I woke up and like, when I looked at the clock, it was like a second or two before, like, and then the numbers came on. So it was like black. And then until like, it didn't know I was looking at it. I don't have that kind of clock. It's not, I'm not that technologically advanced, but it was almost like the simulation hadn't started offering me the information because it was a little out of sync with when I woke up or something, right? So I've had that happen a couple of times. But one night I got up and went to the bathroom. It was when I was still living in LA. And in LA, I lived incredibly close to a very busy freeway interchange. And in a neighborhood that like you often have police sirens, there's an airport not too far away. It's pretty noisy. I'm sitting on the toilet. I'm like, it is so fucking quiet outside. What if I'm like the only person left in the world? And I sat there in that feeling for a moment of like, what would it be like if there was just me and nothing else? And I was surprised at how comfortable I felt, right? And I was just like, okay, well, maybe that is what it is. And like, I need all the other stuff for like entertainment and information, you know, like sort of thought-provoking information or whatever. I went back to sleep. In hindsight, I wonder if I had like gotten up and gone outside and started walking around, if I would have found myself on a stage set, kind of like what Javier is claiming to be walking around in, right? Like if you somehow like wake up out of turn and you know the cast hasn't been called to set yet, like what's actually happening.
Yeah, like you're just out of sync and things haven't caught up yet. This is what Howdy McCoskey was on Rogue, and I'm sure he's told this in other places too, but he was sharing a story about how he had a similar experience where he was like walking somewhere and he had a very definite path in mind, right? And then all of a sudden, without thinking about it, he just was like, I'm going to turn and go this other way. And he went as fast as he could the other way. And he got to this road and there was nothing. There was no birds. There was no cars. There was no people. There was nothing. And he counted and it took him to 10. And then everything just like turned on. It was like, oh, here's some birds. Here's some cars. Here's some people. And it's just sort of the same thing, right? Like the simulation didn't expect that. So it didn't have it ready. So it took it just a moment for like catch up with what you're actually doing. And I keep hearing these stories, and I had this friend a while ago, and his name was Che. So hi, Che, if you were ever going to listen to the show. And he would say, I have no way of knowing that you exist. He's like, as soon as you're gone, I don't know if you're there anymore. If I don't see you, how do I know? You just could pop back in, but that doesn't mean you existed the whole time in between. And at the time I was like, what a narcissistic fucking thing to say. But now I'm like, I mean, to him, I don't actually. So what is the difference, right? Just like we were saying earlier, what's the difference between the placebo and the real thing? They're both just as effective. It has the same effect to you. And it's also like this, whole idea we have in most religions. At some point, there's some sort of tenet that says all is one. We're all one. We're all the same thing. So if this is all just me projecting and reflecting back to myself, it's really saying the same thing as these religions are saying, right?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So Sonia Barrett also has a story like that, where she kind of says, sometimes I wake up in the morning and it's totally quiet. There's no noise. And then one noise happens, like the dog next door barks, and then the whole cacophony of sounds that like make up her reality, the bird and the siren and the cars going by, right? But it was kind of like until that one noise happened that like cued the rest of the band to start playing, right? Then there was nothing. So there's that. And then I think one of the biggest lies that we're all told as children, we're told a lot of lies, right? Like by our parents, by our teachers. But I think maybe the biggest one, and the one that like has made it the hardest for us to figure out our place in this world, is we're told that, like, you remember the first time you got in big trouble for doing something selfish and your mother or your father was like, what do you think, the world revolves around you? The world doesn't revolve around you. But I think it actually does. It does. And and it does for everybody else too. The world revolves around me. It revolves around you. And what you just like said about your friend, like if you leave, I don't know if you still exist. Right. I think that's true. And one of the weirdest things that can ever happen is when you run into somebody when you don't expect to, in a place you would never expect them to be. Right. So like if you say to someone, I'm going to meet you here, right, however strange it is, the place you're going to meet, it's when they show up there, you're not surprised. Right. And if you live in the similar neighborhood and you run into that person at the grocery store, it's not surprising. But how discombobulating is it if you're somewhere that you're not supposed to be and you see someone that you never thought you would see in a place like that? That's the place where the two separate worlds, theirs revolving around them and yours revolving around you, comes together in this uncomfortable like way that is like stage sets bumping, right? Like the person wandered onto the right kind of thing. And it's it's disorienting and confusing. And sometimes people really don't like that, right? I think that is the only evidence that we actually like cohabitate in shared space, that maybe we're in different movies, but we're all like on the same lot, or maybe we're even on different sets, but on the same lot. And if you wander into like, the wrong one accidentally, or whatever, then there's that uncomfortable confrontation with, is this my world or your world?
Yeah, we have this reality maintaining mechanisms, really. And like, I feel like people automatically enact them, whether they like it or not. And this might be part of why we're so easy to program, right? Like one person slaps one person and the whole world talks about it all of a sudden within minutes. And I'm like, oh, apparently the fucking Grammys happened today or whatever. And something happened there. Now everybody is talking about it because it's that quick, because we have these mechanisms built in. And it's like the Agent Smith phenomenon, where like if you walk into a room and you're wearing the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, or you say out loud the wrong thing, everybody stops and is like, what? That is not the program here. Like, and it could be subtle, it could be overt, but we have these mechanisms in place to keep those programs running very smoothly.
Yeah, for sure.
Somebody in the chat, Serena Del Mar, is saying solipsism is a scary thought, and I also don't like solipsism, where we're like, well, nothing can be known, so nothing matters, so everything's stupid, so who cares about anything? But I have this. I think it was Nietzsche, and he said, we need to make our own meaning. Meaning is dead. There's no inherent meaning in any of this, actually. But that's actually a good thing, because then we get to create our meaning. So, and I'm always saying this too in my own way, where I'm like, I don't actually care what's happening. I do. I love talking about it. I love all these conversations and these ideas. I love seeing things from as many perspectives as I can. And in the end, I'm like, I don't care. I'm still here to do what I'm doing, which is to have like the best, most amazing experience I can have in the face of apparently the greatest evil I could have ever imagined. That's awesome to me. And that's what I'm doing here. And so all the other stuff is just fun. It's like icing on the cake. And it doesn't feel solipsistic to me because I don't attach to any of it. Nor do I make it mean that I don't have to care, or that I get to let go of all, I guess, attempt at keeping a coherence for myself and my own meaning that I'm making.
Yeah, the solipsism thing is interesting, right? Like that, I don't think we can't know.
Yeah.
Saying we don't know. Like right now, if anybody who's saying anything other than I don't fucking know, then I'm like, then I'm confused about that, right? Just about everything going on in the world. And it isn't that we can't know. It's just that like for the things that our attention is being like directed to right now, we don't know. And to say that we're sure of something like that, as far as like the grander stuff, like I'm pretty sure I ate steak for dinner tonight and what all that stuff I can be, is just as like, that's just as wrong as saying I can't know anything. Right? There are certain things you can know. And it's like it's about like engagement at the point of like interaction or happening or whatever, right? Like sometimes you have an idea or you're telling yourself a story about something or whatever, and you can do like you can break the pattern of how you normally do it and go up and like talk to the person instead of just thinking what you're thinking about them. Or if you see something bad happening, you can take an action to stop it as opposed to just sitting around, oh my God, what do we do about all the bad things happening in the world? So it's not that things can't be known or shouldn't be known or won't be known, but like, you know, what you were just saying, like, if you really think about the last couple of years, at least in my experience, we've been told that like we're living in like this horrible tyranny and it's marching right up to our door. And if we don't all do this, that, and the other thing in lockstep, then we're all going to be slaves. And sorry. And for me, it's like every day looked like a beautiful day. Like my life was getting better and better. Like a few times, like people asked me to put on masks in places that I you know, or whatever, or some kind of stuff like that. But like what we were being so like what we were told to focus our attention on that was coming towards us. Like I never saw really any evidence of that. Right. And so like some people are saying, you're just burying your head in the sand and whatever. It's like, no, like I'm doing my thing. And, you know, to the extent that like something would come up, I decide how to deal with it when I had that moment of engagement. And then I would know, I don't want to go to this store anymore because these people are Nazis or whatever it was. But like, until then, it's all like a story. Like you can't know until you get there. Right. Kind of thing. So yeah, we're very easy to program based on the things we're told we have to think about something. Yes. We have to ascribe, you said about Nietzsche saying like we're here to make meaning of these things, right? But for us to make meaning of them, and we don't have to make meaning about anything we don't want to, but think about all these things that everyone is telling us we must make meaning about. We must. And if we don't care about this, like, you know, we were having this conversation on my Patreon group the other day about like the Ukraine thing, because right now we're being instructed that that's the only thing you're allowed to care about, except for now, like a bitch slap is also allowed or whatever. Right. But you know, it doesn't, like someone who I consider to be incredibly wise and incredibly sensitive and empathic and all this kind of stuff. She was just like, I just can't care about Ukraine. And it's not because I don't care about people or I want bad things to happen or whatever, but there's no way I can know anything that I would need to know in order to be able to care. And so until something changes as far as that goes, I can't care.
Yes.
Right? Like right on, like I'm with you.
I say the same thing. And it's down to the fact too, where I'm like, I don't even know if I care about what's happening in other states because I don't live in that state and I can't do anything about that state. I'm right here. And people are like, you can send money. Like, I don't want to send you my money. I don't know who you are. I don't know how you're going to use it. I have no way of checking up on it. I don't know where it's going. I don't want to do that either. I'm totally down to go down and like, if there's someone over here who needs like a sleeping bag or a meal or something, like I'll buy them that if that's going to be helpful and I feel like it. But I don't know why I'm supposed to give all my energy, all my attention, all my to shit that I don't even know. There's all this stuff about Ukraine where I'm like, is this even happening? I don't know. I don't know if there's any bombs going off. I don't know if there's any buildings destroyed. I literally don't. I know some people are going to be like, wow, you're insane. But don't you not know? Are you there? Have you seen it? Even when like people go there, are they being allowed in the areas where this is supposedly happening? I don't know. And I don't care anyways, because either way I can't do anything about it. So I'm totally with that. And it doesn't mean that I'm not compassionate. I wish no one had to suffer in war for rich people. That'd be rad, but I can't control that either.
I watched a very interesting interview that was very telling about that, what you just kind of said right now the other day. So there's a gentleman named Alexander Dolgopolov who he was a professional tennis player, and he was a very interesting cat, right? Like he got up to as high as number 13 in the world, but he had a very unusual game. And like the top players definitely didn't want to meet him, particularly not in the early rounds. He could upset anybody, right? Like he was just kind of one of those players. And I always really liked him, but he lived other places all around the world, but he was born in Ukraine, coached by his mom. And there's been a lot of attention on him because he retired last year. But, the tennis world was like, oh, Alexander Dolgopolov, he has gone back to Ukraine. He wasn't there when this started to take up arms and to fight. And he is doing things like calling for the Russian athletes to be banned. Like some of these people are people he used to play against that he's friends with, but he's basically demanding that they be banned from competition as if they have anything to do with, with that, unless my narrative is right and tennis means more, but the world hasn't acknowledged my narrative. But anyway, okay. So he's calling for this and talking about how like, it's not enough just to say, I want peace or, whatever. You have to denounce Putin and you need to give up playing and all this kind of crap. And at the same time, he's sitting obviously in a hotel room, and the interviewer, John Wertheim, is asking him what it's like. And he's like, actually, it's like really peaceful here. It's like not really that bad. There are other cities where other things are happening. But so far since I've been here, so he's in no danger. He's sitting in a hotel room being interviewed by someone over Skype from Sports Illustrated, saying that it's been peaceful since he's been there, and calling for other people to lose the opportunity to do like what they like to do and earn a living based on only his thoughts about what might be going on someplace where he's not.
Yes.
And I was like, and he's been mind controlled just like we have. I'm sure he's doing what he thinks he's the right thing to do and all that kind of stuff. So it's not a judgment, but that's what this is. That's what this is. There are people reporting from peaceful locations in hotels where there's electricity and internet and all this kind of stuff, telling us that like the world is coming to an end. I'm pretty sure when the world comes to the end, you're not on Skype with John Wertheim from Sports Illustrated.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and I'm pretty sure when the world's coming to the end, no one has to tell you that on the news. Like, and this was the same with all the COVID bullshit, which I don't know if I should be streaming to YouTube anymore, but that boat has sailed perhaps. Same thing. I'm like, if it was so dangerous, it's so bad, like, why do you have to constantly remind us? Still, to this day, there are still commercials that are like, you better get your vaccine. I'm like, what? Why are we still... Again, like, if it were that important, if it worked that well, if it were that dangerous, none of these things I would need to be told about. I would just see it. I would look outside and go, oh, shit, that's a problem I need to solve. And it's not.
Totally.
Ugh, it's so tiring. So I'm going to jump totally to a completely different thing now. And I had this experience once a long time ago where I decided I really wanted to know what it was like to know a witness relocation person. Like, I wanted to know, like, what that would be like. Like, tell me, like, what did it feel like? You had to leave everyone behind, and, like, that would be so fascinating. And at the same time, for no reason, I was like, I really want to meet someone with multiple personalities, because I want to see if it's, like, real, right? Like, are they actually different? Can I tell? Can I feel the difference? Like, I want to experience that, not by having it, but by seeing someone else who has it, knowing them somewhat intimately so I could, know. And I just started thinking about these things, and within like a month, I met this really random woman at college, and for no reason we became friends. There was no reason for us to connect. We were so different age, different personalities, but we connected for some reason, and we became close, and she had been witness relocated, and she had multiple personality disorder. And I didn't tell her, I'm looking for people who I just met her. And then I got to experience both those things. And I was like, this is so weird. And then once I learned all about them, we just fell out of friendship, and we didn't hate each other. We just stopped talking and never hung out. And I'm like, did I manifest that? Or did I psychically look forward and see that it was coming and go, that's going to be interesting? Or is there a difference, right? Yeah.
Because multiple realities and all that kind of stuff, right? But this is my question. Were all of her personalities in the witness relocation program, or was just...
just the one, yeah, on paper. Well, and even then, I was like, are they actually different personalities? If you know that they're there, then and they know that everyone else is there, what's different about it? I don't know. I don't understand it still to this day, really.
I think there's different kinds, right? So they at a certain point, they stopped calling it multiple personality disorder and started calling it dissociative identity disorder. And then there's I don't know if there's a difference between created multiples, like MKUltra style alters, and the ones that are derived naturally, or if there is such a thing as the natural thing. And anytime that's the case, right, that it's a, trauma induced in some way or whatever. So I don't know. It's interesting. Elisa E, like who I've interviewed many times, and she's a friend of mine. She wrote the books Our Life Beyond MK Ultra, and she is one of the few who will who calls herself a full MPD, right? Like, so a lot of people will be like, oh, it was an alter, but once I got deeper, whatever. Like, she's doesn't have multiple thing going on anymore, but she doesn't sugarcoat it. She's like, no, like it's like an MPD kind of like it's, whatever, right? And it's interesting for her to listen to her in her books, and even when she talks, describe like the hierarchy and like how people would either know or not know, like most people could not tell when she had switched, right? And just, it was interesting, like there's a whole system inside. Now hers were kind of created MK Ultra alters, but they were fully functioning. They weren't just like slightly different moods or whatever, right? But I don't know, like I also wonder, these psychiatric conditions or whatever, like if we're really being told the truth about what those are, and if these names and sort of descriptions of them are really accurate, and just being like, when you say multiple personality to somebody, then you have an expectation, whether that's anywhere near the truth of what the condition actually is or not, that starts to play into it, and it's hard to get a full read, right? But it is fascinating to me that like the same thing showed up in one person, right? It's kind of like when you're looking for a handyman and he comes over and your internet's also broken. It's like, oh, I'm a tech guy, right? And then it's like, really, are you? Or are you an agent who's here to explore all my shit? Like, right?
Are you programming me? Am I? Yeah. This is... It's really interesting. I just, as you're describing this, I was thinking like, there's the sort of Gnostic ish idea that, some consciousness came and into the abyss or whatever and fractured into like a million different pieces, and that's actually what this place is this one consciousness that's like every single one of us then is like an alter or a multiple of the personality. And then if that's true, I feel like it's like the never-ending story at the end of the book. He can't leave Fantastica unless he finishes all the stories he started while he was there, which there's way too many of, and he's like, well, fuck, I'm screwed, I'm stuck here forever then. And then Atreyu, being the honorable one, is like, friend, I'll finish all your stories for you. And then he gets to leave and go back, and I'm like, shit, what if that is what's happening here, and we have to integrate all of this before we can like escape the Matrix or whatever? Have you ever thought about those things?
Okay, so this is stuff like I did great like precognition for the show today, right? Because so one of the things I was thinking about that I wanted to talk to you about, like what you just said, is another way of saying it. Okay, so like I have had this story that I wanted to tell. I didn't know if I would talk about it with Michael on the show I do with him or whatever. I didn't know what I would kind of do with it. And then today, when I saw that you were calling the episode Mosaic of Strangeness, I was like, okay, this is a good chance for me to tell my story, right? So like when I first started doing that particular show, it was like during COVID, and it was like we were had been presented with all of this like crazy, disparate shit. Like the reality was so fractured, and it's like trying to put it together. Like, I guess I always mayed mosaics more than collages or something. And when I think of mosaics, like the ones that I always remember seeing were in the subway stations in New York, right? They have them in other train stations or subway stations. But even like a lot of the walls in the subway stations are kind of like tiles that aren't perfect. So even if they're not true mosaics, they kind of look like it. So when I titled the show, I found this picture of like 2 empty seats in a train station with this big mosaic thing behind it that looks sort of like a vortex or like a time travel kind of thing, right? And I've always thought train stations were very weird, particularly subway stations at night. And right, train stations can be weird too, but particularly subway stations. And I've had a couple of really strange experiences, but I'm just going to tell one of them tonight. I've had weird things with like the train, like circling back and different levels of a train station and weird kind of things. But when I lived in New York, I only ever fell asleep in the train one time. Okay. So I lived in New York for a year, and I worked late night. So I traveled back, I was working kind of down in the Village or sort of Lower East Side or, whatever. And I was living way up in Washington Heights. So it was a pretty decent subway ride home in the middle of the night. You had to wait a while in the train station. So one night, like, I don't know how this happened because I was almost home, right? But I did fall asleep in the train. Like, I think I remember hearing the stop before mine, and then I don't know what happened. And I woke up and I was by myself in the train in like some weird, like domed room that looked like from like a church or a Tartaria building or something like that. There was no one else there. It was the end of the line. There was no train station anymore. Like, I just got out and there was no place to go. There was no like turnstile. There was no stairs. There was nothing. And like, I was like, what the fuck is this? But there was one like exit door, like the kind of push exit door, like to get out of a movie theater. So I go out there and like, I realized that like, okay, like I could go back and like back a couple of blocks, get back on the train in the train, go back down and then take the train back. I was not that far from where I was trying to go, though it seemed like I had somehow ended up on a different line. I don't know what was going on. I figured it out. Right. But from where I got off the train, there was like no station there. It was just this weird room that looked like I was in some kind of old church or old Tartarian building. Right. So I never knew what to make of that experience, but it's just one of the strange experiences I've had in train scenarios. So a couple of weeks ago, I was just like, what is it with this Stand With Ukraine shit? This is like some really special kind of mind control program. Like, sure, I'd seen all the memes, like, I do the next popular thing and you don't need a vaccine passport anymore, but you might need proof that you stand with Ukraine to get in this restaurant. I'd seen all that shit. But I'm like, what is this? So I just looked up, and I'll do this sometimes, like Stand With Ukraine mind control program, right? I looked it up. I didn't find anything about that. But about like 6 or 7 like entries down, I saw this Wired article from 2007, right? About a mind control technology that the United States, the DHS, was buying from like some Russians who used to test it at the end of a subway line. And the room that they were testing it in looked exactly like the fucking shit that I ended up in New York.
Whoa.
Right. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to save this article and read it. And so today, because I had a feeling we'd talk about this, I went back and I started reading this article. Right. And basically it was like a technology. And this was in 2007, the article was written. So if it's being written, it's already being done, right? But I had lived in New York in 2004. And so this couple that like worked for like university, they have like a psychotechnology department in Moscow. They had set up this testing area at the end of an old subway line, and people would come, and it was basically a way to like read people's thoughts. Right. And what's funny is years later, when I was working with a nutritionist who used a lot of interesting technology, she had a device that was kind of like this. Right. So it can do it. But the idea being that like the United States DHS wanted to use this to identify terrorists. Right. And so they had always been anti working with or buying any of the technologies that the Russians called psychotronic weaponry. Right. They were kind of suspicious of Russians, but for some reason like this, and they had even talked to this guy who invented it before during the Waco siege, but they had decided not to go with the technology because he couldn't give them insurances. But now they decided they wanted it and blah, blah, blah. But the whole thing was like literally, basically being able to dip into someone's consciousness and predict like what they're going to do. Right. And I found this while I'm looking for the Ukraine mind control thing, and it offered me the answer to this, end of the trainway thing. Like, I don't know what the heck happened to me that night. I don't know if they were running this project randomly on people who are by themselves on a train at night in New York, right? Kind of thing. But when I saw that room, like, I was just like, when this goes up, I'll put the link to the article in the comment section so people can go and read it or whatever. But it was like, wow, okay, that was like a loop I had been trying to close for a long time. So something told me to go look up about mind control programs related to Ukraine. It's kind of like finishing the story, like, right? Like I have all these experiences that I haven't found the answer to. I haven't finished that story. And so the world is generating all these things, like the creation reality, my own mind, whoever's doing it, whatever, is creating all these crazy big narratives, like poking, prodding, trying to give you the answer so you can like solve that mystery or finish that story or close that loop. And when you solve them all, then you get to get out of here kind of thing. And think about how many conversations I even think about, like just in the show that I do with Michael, we open up so many windows and pull on so many threads that we don't go back and close, that we don't see them all the way down, because like you have a job, you have other things you have to do, you know, whatever, right? But think about like if we really did, when we were on to something, or when we were telling a story or doing research or digging out a rabbit hole, like if we really did make a point of like completing them all, finishing telling all those stories, I wonder what would happen. Like maybe the world wouldn't have to, when I say the world, it's just our collective whatever doing is, have to continually generate more outlandish stories and narratives to try and pull us back in to complete the story we were telling, or the thought we didn't finish, or the thread we didn't, you know, whatever it is. Right.
It kind of reminds me of this thing I keep coming back to recently where, you know, drugs don't get you high. Actually, they complete the synapse that allows the chemical to flow that is what actually gets you high. And so it's already within you, right, that's happening. And it's a similar concept to, you know, I no longer react to certain triggers that I used to have because that wound isn't open anymore. It doesn't hurt me anymore. So I just go, yeah, that's you being a fuckhole or whatever. I don't really care. Right? But if I did still have that wound, it could then elicit this response from me. And so it's a similar idea, right? Like when you close the story, you close the loop, you finish the story, that thing can no longer pull you into whatever this is here. And so that makes so much sense to me that like maybe we should try to close more loops and finish more stories so that we're not reacting and keep going deeper into the metaverse or whatever this space is. Or that we just free ourselves, because it's another, again, you can look at it from so many windows. And if you're looking at it from the spiritual window, you're just freeing yourself more and more from things that are not real and are not of your essential purity and oneness, and so you release that and you no longer have to then ever deal with it again. You don't have to see that reflection. And I had something else I was going to go there with that, but I can't remember what it was.
The reactivity, like you were talking about the reactivity, and like I don't know, the reactivity one is big, right? We've all had that thing that always upset us. And then one time, like maybe we done some work on ourselves, or maybe like we had just had some experiences, the thing happens again. And you have that moment where you're like, you could get upset, and you have that moment of deciding, am I going to, like, I don't really feel upset, but usually this is the cue for me to usually do that.
Yeah.
Right. And like, you have that moment of contemplation. And if you decide it's not worth it, then generally that's the end of it. But if you decide to engage it and get upset anyway, then it unleashes the whole thing. Like you have a whole nother cycle of many, many, many more of those. And it always reminded me of like, you know, when a baby like falls or bumps their head, they don't start crying until the mother goes, oh, and the baby looks at the mom and it's like, phew, cry now, right? Like that, it's like that kind of thing, right? So the more like when you get that opportunity of like, I could get upset or I could not, that's the world, that's you getting the chance to close that loop or to finish that thread and just be done with that. So
yes. And okay, I remembered what it was. This is why I think it's also very important for us to imagine the best possible future where all the things do come to a close and we don't have to eternally follow, because people are always saying like, oh, we're just going to, they are going to do this and that, and we are going to end up in this sort of place, and this is what's going to happen. And I'm like, okay, well then what then? Because it can't go on like this forever, right? There has to be at some point a balance point or a solution. So like, what is that going to look like? So let's just imagine it at least. Because if we can at least start to imagine what it might be like, what it might look like, and how we might get there, I think that's what opens up the pathway for it to actually occur and for us to be done with all of this, close those loops. And we don't have many of those options or examples, right? Most of our stories are apocalyptic. Most of our stories are how horrifying the future is going to be. How many stories have you ever read or seen, you know, on movies or TVs that end well, that where the world is like, yay, we did it, good job guys, high five, Russia, we're all happy with you, or whatever? They don't really exist, right? The conclusion is usually like, haha, someone has achieved world domination, or some kind of a Superman is keeping us all in check from our lowest natures or something. Like there's no happy endings.
Or there's like, everything is burnt. There's like almost no one left in the world, but the two who are in love somehow survive, and like that kind of thing. So what's the saying? Like, I don't remember if I heard this in a movie or where I heard this, but the saying that like, in the end, everything will be okay. And if it's not okay, it's not the end.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's that saying. But I think also like, I can think of very few miseries I've experienced that weren't mostly of my own making. And it doesn't mean that other people didn't like enthusiastically participate. But you know, there's like an entire reality that is supported by the things we do, the things we say, the things we buy when we are trying to prevent something from happening, or when we're in fear that something might happen, or like when we're trying, like that kind of stuff, right? And so like all of this like energy that they are able to suck up, and all this money that they're able to make off of us, and whatever you think, if you think it's all about money, which I personally don't, but a lot of people do, like if you think it's all about like, you know, harnessing energy or crowdsourcing solutions to problems that most people think you've got solved, but like I know you don't actually have solved. And so, you know, there's a lot of other weird stuff going on that could be classified as like, you know, socializing the work on a problem and then privatizing the profit that you make from having solved it, if you ever do, kind of thing. There's a lot of that going on. And if we're all locked in a cage and dead, we're not available like to create that stuff for them anymore, whether that stuff be actual products or whether that stuff be idea generation. Like, you know, I have lots of ideas about what's really going on with these social media platforms, and even what we think of as censorship, that do not fall in line with people's chosen narratives. And I actually think that a lot of censorship is creating I think sometimes when they decide they're going to censor an idea, it's because they don't need that idea to be discussed anymore, not because they're trying to prevent from that thoughts, but there's other problems they would rather have the inquisitive people trying to solve that they don't have the answer to yet. So if you shut down, I mean, most people don't just like get kicked off of YouTube or get a chance strike or whatever and just disappear and be like, you know what, I'm not going to think creatively anymore or whatever. We come up with coded language, or we switch to another topic that we would never have switched to if the one we were preferring talking about before hadn't become such a pain in the ass to talk about. Well, what if that, you know, new topic that you're talking about is one that they don't have an answer for yet, right? And suddenly everyone's on that one. And then later that becomes a censored thing because they're done with that. And I think that like there is this hysteria that is generated by the idea that people, and I'm not saying people, I have my fucking Vimeo channel, like I've experienced that. I've had, you know, strikes and, you know, had things removed and whatever. But I've never gotten into creating the whole, like I'm being shadow banned or I'm being like attacked kind of thing around it, because I know that like frenetic feeling, like the freneticism that it creates. And I've watched people who run around in that all the time. And I see like little monsters like trailing behind, like eating that shit up. Yes. Right. And so it's like, you know, it's just, there's a lot of different economies and like systems and structures that are built around what people choose to do with these ideas of what we think we know about why something is happening. Yeah. Right. And then there's always this other answer that actually makes like a lot of sense, but somehow isn't as satisfying to this narrative that we have, that like we're the underdogs being attacked and and we all fall into that. Sometimes I'm not immune to that. Right. But I actually don't think that they can do things they want to do without us. And it would be, you know, it's kind of like when a new boss comes in and fires the whole staff and then realizes he has no one to like do the stuff, and then he's fucked and he ends up having to work 80 hours and, you know, it's not happening.
Yeah. This is you know, it's very similar to the Loosh idea too, in that, you know, if this is all like that information field, that ether, that fuzzy, whatever, and anything can emerge from it, come through it, be created by it or with it, then consciousness is the director of that, right? And we're all here together, and whether we're millions of fractions of the same consciousness or we are just our own consciousness, it's all powerful. It's all creating this space. And I often think that all of this really is just their attempt to get us to agree to just give them the energy with which they can then create whatever world they want. And maybe it's also like Tracy Twyman had the idea that there was like a hidden slice of the globe, that they have, you know, secret islands and stuff that none of us have even been near or flown over or anything, and that's, you know, kind of what they're maybe creating, like the best stuff over there or whatever. But either way, that really it's not about money, and it is a sort of spiritual way of looking at things, but at the same time, it's just the information field, right? They just want to control the information field. They just want to be the ones who can say, like, here's what I get to experience now, and here's how I'm going to experience it. Thanks for your energy. Keep going, or whatever. Here's your next thing to keep feeding me this energy. They want to control the composition of the field, basically. We're the field generators.
Yeah, I think that, and also, like, I think they recognize, like, how unique people can be in their thinking, right? And that they sure, they have their little think tanks and stuff like that, but like after a while, it's like the same 37 people basically generating, like, you want to look outside that small pond for fresh ideas, for new talent, and all of this kind of stuff. And, you know, because of the way technology has, you know, has expanded, and the way sort of social media and all this, people are just saying everything they think in a way that can be collected. I actually think that they're getting more of their ideas for their creations from us than they are from their inner circle.
I have thought that, like, they just have, like, whatever, they're like, okay, let's tap into this phone and listen to these people for a while, and they're like, ooh, that'd be a good idea for a show. Okay, we're even gonna call it that person's name. That's the name of the show now. Like, I mean, shit like that.
People will say, like, oh my God, I just watched this new show and whatever. It reminds me of this story you told, Emily. But like, I had the crazy thing that, like, I had this fucking wackadoodle idea back in 2017 that sugar was programmable matter. And I went on and on and on about it. I did 4 hours of straight of me just like blabbering on as if I were like on a good one, right? About this. So I explored every avenue. I said crazy shit. I said rational sounding shit. I used my knowledge of nutrition. I totally made up possibilities and whatever, right? And like, you know, it was early on in my media career. I wasn't polished at all. It's hard for me to watch those videos, but I've never tried to go back and clean them up and recreate them because I was channeling it. It was raw, right? And in 2019, right before I ever gave the first public talk I was going to give about that at Robert's conference, Brown University and DARPA dropped a paper about basically like sugar molecules being used to store more information than any other piece of technology ever. And there was literally things in the paper that were almost direct, like, quotes or references to something that I had said in that state. Now, I don't know if I generated the idea or if I tapped into it, like it could be either, right? So that, and then also, you know, one of the things that came through with that was this idea that sugar had windows in it. And right. And I was like, and I don't know if this means windows like, you know, crystals have windows in them kind of thing, or if it means like windows like an operating system.
Wow.
Right. And I went on and on about Bill Gates and why do they have us eating all the sugar and crap? And then like way early in the COVID narrative, right? Like you start hearing about one of the pokeroonies that they're working on is developed with using needles, like these little needles made of sugar, and it will upload an operating system into, like, it was literally like, you know, pretty much what I had said, right? And so I know the whole thing with lots of people have the same ideas at the same times or whatever. And then there's also like, possibility that somebody who's sitting in a laboratory, like they have their Google thing set for any time somebody says programmable matter or whatever, then it scoops it and sees what they're talking about. And somebody was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. That's actually a good one. Let's go try. Yeah. Right. Because I was talking about how useful sugar had been in my own mind control and how it could carry information and this and that. And so I will never know. Right. I will never know, and it doesn't matter. And I'm sure that there's been other people that have had the idea, but I actually think that that's how they develop some of these technologies. This crazy person said this thing, can you make it happen? And then they put together the Skunkworks team, and you know how, you know about Skunkworks, right? You know, and then that's it. And probably 9 out of 10 of the ideas that go to Skunkworks don't ever materialize. But if one of them does, and it's useful and it can store as much information as the Library of Alexandria on like 1 molecule of sugar or whatever, that I guess it was worth the time spent on collecting all 10, right? So
wow. I've always thought about that, exactly that, but that is the best real life example I have ever heard of that type of thing happening, where you're like, no, this was my real life, and now all of a sudden it's like happening over here on a larger scale. I totally think that is exactly what they do. And why not? They have microphones everywhere, cameras everywhere. They have information data gathering things that we continuously commit to we just contribute for free. All of our information, all all of our ideas, all of our genius. So I have a really random question for you, and people ask me this sometimes, and I never am sure quite how to answer, and so I'd love to hear how you answer it. And they ask me, well, why you? Why have you had so many strange experiences, and why have so many weird things happen to you?
So I think probably exactly as many or more strange things that happen to me happen to everyone else. I'm just an observant little fuck.
That's what I think.
I'm an observant little fuck, and I talk more than most people. I talk a lot. And there's something that happens when you move an idea from inside of your mind to out of your mouth that clarifies the occurrence. It starts to make sense in a different way, right? And then there's also like, you know, we don't really know how like reality is built, right? We don't know. We think that we're living in this reality where time is linear from past to future or back to front, but we don't actually know that that it isn't the other way, that we're like backfilling a story. And I have found that if I have an idea, right, like whether it's an idea that I think is true or whether like there's some place I'm trying to get and I can't bridge that gap, but if I make up some crazy sounding shit that does it, okay, then I can move on with the story. That 9 times out of 10, like much later, the part that was like the craziest and most made up will turn out to be the part that was true. Maybe the other stuff is also, right? I don't know that we're not like how convincingly you tell a story or how much sort of detail, like my grandmother was a great storyteller, right? Like granular details kind of stuff, right? And like, I don't know if all the stories she told me were real or not, but I can tell them with so much detail that then like I can go find evidence of them out in the world. And I don't know if she was reporting that really accurately and she had a great memory and I picked up all the stuff, or like if she spoke that so well into existence that I could go experience it because I expected it to be there kind of thing, right? So I think that so I think it's like the being like observant and detail oriented in the way you tell stories, but also like telling, like if there's something you think is neat and you like and you want it to be true, or and when I say want it to be true, I don't mean like, you know, oh, you're telling a lie, but you want it to be true so you don't have to like suffer the consequences of the, I don't mean that. I mean like this is a really interesting idea, so I'm going to flesh it out and put energy into it and tell the story as if it's true because I think it would be neat if it was, right? And then you sort of like, you know, put yourself into it in a way that gets woven into the fabric of reality, and eventually people will recognize it as always having been there, right? And it's like I don't think reality works the way we think. I think it's constantly morphing and changing. I don't think we're in the same one every day necessarily. And so if you tell a story, then maybe like the world relocates you to the one where that exists so you can experience your creation. Like, I think there's that possibility. So I think that, and I tell this people all the time, like we all, I don't see when people are like talking about having been in like mind control projects or any of that kind of stuff. I don't think they're special people. I think everyone is sort of tested for that shit or looked at or experienced some of it. But like people believe they're like, no, that's a story. That isn't really true. And so they don't dig in with their own story, right? The more about, like, if you investigate yourself, you will find crazy shit. The only people I know who have normal, boring lives are the ones who haven't looked into their own self, haven't looked into their parents, haven't looked into their families. Families are fucking weird, right? They're weird. And people who aren't driven to like dig around into that stuff, like, okay, like maybe those are the same people that are kind of like NPCs.
Yeah.
Like when there's not that curiosity, right? So be observant and then like tell your stories, dude, right? Don't, you know, like you can say I'm telling a story. That's not a lie, right? If you're like, I'm just like making this shit up because this is like how it seems like it should be to me. Be honest about what you're doing. Don't like, you know, be a tall tale weaver of like the deceptive kind, but use your imagination. Like the stories they tell us are sucky, right? Like, so why can't we tell a better one? You know?
Yes.
So yeah.
I think that is exactly what it is. You nailed it on the head. And I remember someone telling me for the first time, like, you're very, very observant. And I was like, oh, I mean, I didn't observe that about me, so I didn't know that. But I think that is one of the key differences. Is I'm like, hey, what about this? Look at that. And other people are like, what are you even talking about? Oh, that is actually a thing over there, huh? I didn't notice, right? And that is a big piece of it. And it's very similar to all of the concepts, I think, in traditional sort of magic as well, right? Like as you speak, so you create, and you're putting your will and your intention into something, and it's drawing it towards you in existence. And I even sometimes, like you said, is each day a different reality. I was just hearing Joe Biden say, like, I didn't say that, or like he was very confused about it. I'm like, obviously he's like got dementia or something, but I was like, I don't know, maybe this is a different clone, or maybe I like transitioned into a different reality, and this is reality where he really didn't say that, but some other people like didn't quite catch the reality shift, and so they're still stuck in the other reality but somehow able to interact in this one. And it could be anything. But I think the principles of magic are actually similar to the principles of how this reality actually works. You don't have to necessarily practice like burning a candle in a pentacle on a full moon facing east or whatever. You could do it in a million different ways. It's just about how much energy and intention do you bring to it, or maybe even accidentally stumble into.
Yeah, I think that for sure. And then I also think I was thinking about this the other day too, right? So like do you ever go through periods of time where like you're struggling with your memory, like you're more forgetful, you can't remember things in quite the same way, and then it passes, and like a week or two later you're like, okay, like now my memory is working fine, right? But how do you know your memory is actually working fine? Like maybe just the stuff you were struggling to remember, you actually just like forgot it, and so there was no confusion anymore, and you perceive that as like, oh, my memory is working fine again. And that we're constantly cycling through, like that there's, cellular death is happening all the time, right? And cellular regeneration, like most cells last like 7 years or 5 years. And think about what happens with, I'm thinking about this in preparation for an interview I'm doing with somebody who's recently lost 100 pounds. That person has lost a lot of fat cells.
Yeah.
Like there was a lot of information stored there.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a person who experiences like a lot of Mandela effects and a lot of shifting reality and a lot of very strange anomalies. Right. And I'm going to ask him about how the weight gain and weight loss correlated with a lot of this other weird stuff that was going on.
Wow.
Right. And if you can store lots of information on sugar, right, and sugar is part of what's going on with the person in their body, both when they gain weight and then when they lose weight, like they're not having as much of that.
Yeah.
Like, how is that affecting your data storage? But also, like, what information does fat store? Does fat store trauma? Is certain information stored on fat and others stored on sugar molecules and some stuff, right? Like how, like we know, like we use certain parts of our computer for like RAM and other parts for storage and blah, 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 blah. Like, why wouldn't the body be like that as well? And then what happens when you sort of cycle through and discard that cell, right? Like your memory is now different. Like if that was stored on that and it's gone, there might be like an echo or a residue, and you can kind of like dig into the tone or the feeling of it, but you have trouble now recalling that. But you don't ever notice that. When you think your memory is fine, you're not aware of the things that you're not thinking of, only when you're reaching for something, right? And then that generally works itself out after a certain point. And we don't, I think we're constantly like erasing and rewriting and rearranging and whatever. And I think some of it has to just do with the natural process of cellular, like, passing over and regeneration and whatnot. And
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never ever considered that, and now I'm like wondering. It makes me think of people finally made me watch Dark City. Is it Dark City? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was like, that could actually be like I could have literally just started today, and everything that came before this is just my implanted memories, and I assume that I've been living this whole life, and really I haven't been. And it reminds me too of these coma stories, and my favorite one that I've ever heard, not that I'm happy that this happened to someone, but it's just so fascinating because they lived this entire life in their coma, right? And in their coma they had a wife and kids and puppies or whatever, and like a job and everything, and when they came out of their coma, they were like, well, where's my wife? And it's like, here's your wife. That's not my wife. Like, who is that? Like, here's your kids and here's your dog. Like, none of those are my people. Like, where are my people? And they all just suddenly died because you woke up, basically. Like, where are those people now? And like, that was very, very real to this person. You know, they lived this whole entire different life, and coming back to this life was like dying to them, and the loss of everything they knew, and everything here like had never existed at all. And it's just so fascinating. Like, which one was real? Did they actually go into the coma, into this world, or did they come out of it? I don't know.
Yeah. So I did some shows about Dark City, the movie Dark City. I only saw it just like maybe last year or the year before as well.
Yeah.
And it was it brought up a lot of stuff, right? Like interesting sort of like time rituals and the way they were sort of keeping and controlling time, basically underground. And it was there was no real information as to what city this was that they were in, right? There is the implication it was any city or every city or just one city in particular. But it reminded me a lot of going out to raves and underground warehouse parties in particularly underground warehouse parties that are in like downtown and in East LA. It does seem like you go in and then when you come out, the reality has changed. Almost like especially because you're in this environment that is all based around like tempo, right? So it's kind of like that big clock that they had, and it's like all these people dressed in black, listening to the same sound and stuff, and you go outside and everything seems to have been like just rearranged slightly, but most people aren't observant, so don't even notice, and exactly what you're talking about. And when we were doing this show on it, I realized that like a couple of years ago, they'd had some like anniversary celebration, and they had done events in like many, many, many different cities. And they were doing it in correlation with like dance music parties kind of stuff. So I think there was like a give in terms of like what was really going on with that I had kind of tapped into anyway. But also what you were just saying about the coma, back to Salvia divinorum.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan has a friend named Ari Shafir who talked about what happened to him when he did Salvia or something one time, right? It's like a 15-minute trip. It's not a very long trip. He had like a whole other life with wife and children, and like it was like a complete other life. And then when he came out of it, like he had to sort of like, it was like crazy. He thought he was in there for years, and he came out, and you can still find the YouTube videos where he's talking about this, and it's like kind of crazy. But yeah, and you think, have you heard about some of these people too who have had like Mandela effects where like one of their children is now like they had a child and now they don't, and it's like, where did this like the personal I don't know the truth or the reality of these things, but my guess would be that things like we live in such a strange place that things like that do happen, you know. And don't you have dreams where sometimes you're pretty confused when you wake up?
Oh yeah.
Like,
those are like I hate those. I don't hate them, but I'm like, it takes me like hours to be like, I'm Lindsay. I have a show. Like, here's where I live. And like, this is all normal, because they're so disruptive. Like, they're so convincing.
I mean, sometimes I wake up in the morning, for many, many years, I didn't remember my dreams at all. And like now I still have nights where I don't know if I'm not dreaming or I just don't remember, but it's fine. Like whatever, that happens. And then other times it's like you wake up and it's like, okay, like I was dreaming before and now I'm awake. And then there's other times where it's just like, you're not sure where's the reality and where's the dream. And then there's also this funny space in between that also like matches like repetitive ideas you have about reality, like things that you think are true, but like I have these like areas and like I have like versions of Austin and Los Angeles and whatever that exist in my dreams over and over again. And like I will try in real life to go find those places, and like I'll go to where I think they are, but they're not really quite there, but I can feel that this is the spot, and it's almost like overlays. And sometimes it can get real confusing in that, you know, and I don't know if that confusing spot is just a second you're in it or if you're there for like hours. But it is weird. And I actually think that may be the truth. I think the most multi-layered and complex version of reality is the one that is the truth. And we just can't stay there very long because it's overwhelming. And we've like, you know, we somehow have been, I don't know if it's allowed ourselves to be, or there's something that has happened, whether we've done it to ourselves, that has like made us only able to tolerate a high level of complex stimulation and information for very short periods of time. And then we have to recede to what we call the real world, which is actually not real at all. It's like a holding cell until you've developed like enough wherewithal to step back into the chaos of that field of information that is endless and completely full, right?
Yeah. This is so I think Stephen King calls them dreamscapes, which was the first time I heard someone else describe these areas you go back to again and again. And for me, they're like you. They always correlate with real life somewhere, but they're just not actually there, or not how they are in the dream. They're very similar, but they're not exactly the same. And I had a teacher recently, a while ago, and he was saying, those spaces actually are significant, and he gave me some practices to do, and I started seeing more of them and remembering more of them, but also then seeing how they connect to each other, and I can travel between them even though they're not anywhere near each other in the real world. And that something about that is actually like starting to map out this place that is important. And I'm like, this is now blowing my mind, because now I'm on this journey of mapping my dreamscapes and their connections to one another, and sometimes the connections are seemingly guarded by certain beings who are like challenging you. They're like, do you get to be here actually? Or like, are you gonna, oh, okay, I guess you can. Or they're like, no, you can't. What are you gonna do about it? And it's almost, they're not like violent or evil. They're just like, that's their job for some reason.
Yeah. So we have to have a deeper conversation about this sometime, because I think we could probably 2 hours, just do 2 hours just on this topic. But I'm going to ask you this because it relates to what we were just talking about. Are you familiar with like the Monroe Institute gateway experience kind of stuff?
Yes.
Okay, so that's not something that I ever was into. Like, I'd heard of Bob Monroe Institute or whatever, but somebody I was describing to somebody all these experiences that I've had in my life. And they were like, oh, you need to go look at this document, right? This Gateway 21 document or whatever. And it basically was describing this basically project and program that the military was curious about for doing this whole thing and blah, 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 right? Like, okay, you're familiar with it. So what's interesting is there's this whole area of Austin called, like, it's literally called Gateway, right? And when I first moved to Austin, like, I literally stayed in the Gateway Plaza in a hotel until I found an apartment. And then I moved kind of right down that throughway into a neighborhood that was sort of just a little bit of a distance from it, but I was hanging out in an area that is also sort of part of that. Like, there's a neighborhood called Gateway, and then there's like a throughway where there's all these things that refer to that as well. And when I got an apartment, it was just a little bit of ways away from there. And for some reason, as soon as I moved into the apartment, my mom insisted on getting me a Gateway computer. And literally, I was living right next to Monroe Street, right? Okay. My grandfather's name is Monroe. My niece's name is Monroe. The grandfather's brother's name is Robert. Like, there's this weird, all this weird arrangement of that kind of stuff, right? But what I came to understand about why this person was telling me about this Gateway experience kind of stuff, and I've done research and a lot of it matches up, is I had all these strange experiences when I first moved to Austin in 1999, where I was like having these dreamscapes where I was like looking for shit that then I would go look for and I couldn't find. Well, when I just moved back to Austin this past year, some of the things I used to look for that I couldn't find are now there in the places that I used to look for them but couldn't find them.
Yeah.
Those time travel.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like connecting. If you go to a certain spot, a coordinate on a map, we don't think of those things as also being places where you can connect to other times in that same place.
Yeah.
Right? So there are temporal coordinates as well. And so I would love to talk to you about mapping this dream space, not only from place to place, but from time to time. And since I've become aware of this, I've started to realize that, like, there are certain areas that I have a lot of resonance with. And when I go to those areas and I think about other things that I thought when I was in that same place, that, like, where did that thought come from? I realize it comes from when I'm standing there now, because now I know those things. And back then I didn't. So it was like a transmission of information from the future to the past kind of thing. Right. Yeah. So I'd love to explore this deeper with you sometime. It's very fascinating.
That is so cool. It makes so much sense. I've had so many events in my life that are like time travel-y. I've talked about them before with the audience before. And that explains why that could be happening, because it's always energetic and informational more than it's actually me like going, and now I'm in 1992. Haha, hi guys. Like, no, it's the consciousness time traveling and shifting more than anything else.
And what you said about these like guards, these entity guards. Okay, so for me, the guards don't come so much in that like metaphysical space you're trying to travel to. The guards for me come in real life in locations where that could happen.
And it's
recognized in hindsight, right? So for me, like I start to resonate with the vibration of a place if I can dance there. Like if I like there, I can go to a party and like this side of the dance floor, I can't dance, but for some reason here I can dance, right? And I'll be getting into a thing where like I'm about to have liftoff to whatever reality that I'm gonna go to, and some fucking weird person will come and stand right in front of me and like do things to try and distract me.
Wow.
That didn't used to happen, right? That was not something that happened early in my years with dancing and traveling, but it's almost like once system has recognized you as someone who can do this, they either want to piggyback and so or something, or distract or prevent or try and create challenges for you. Now, sometimes I can do it anyway and whatever, but for me, the guards are on this side. That's interesting. For you, they're kind of on the other, right? So
that's fascinating.
Some of the weird, I call them boundary guards.
I love that.
Yeah.
I know people have encountered them too, again, on other drugs. And so it'd be really interesting to, like you said, do an episode where we talk about dreams and drugs and the boundary guards and this exact thing. That would be fun. Well, I know we could talk for hours and hours about anything and everything forever, so we'll just have to keep doing more awesome episodes. The audience is really enjoying this one and loving it. My numbers are strange because they're one place telling me there's no one, and other places telling me there's a bunch of people, and then other places telling me there's a different number of people in the same place. So who knows who's out there, but we love you all, and we'll do these future episodes. But I do want to ask you to share with people anything that you want to them to know, like if you have anything coming up, new places that you're at. I know that you're maybe on Rockfin now, and some other places that you might want to invite people to, and where they should go to connect with you and find all of your amazing content that you create.
Cool. So definitely thank you, Lindsay, for inviting me to Rockfin. That I just am starting to populate my Rockfin channel. A good portion of my material that's available other places will be available there, as well as some, I do have one series I've started that is really created for Rockfin. It's about occult tennis, which I love to talk about, right? It's like, does such a thing exist? But I'm making it exist, whether it does or not. So I'm on Rockfin at Emily Moyer. I would love to have some more followers and get that going over there. But I'm also in all the usual places. I'm on YouTube. My name, Emily Moyer. My website is emilycmoyer.com. You can find links to a lot of my stuff there. Also, I'm a nutrition consultant. I use a lot of like esoterics and psychic and intuitive stuff in my nutrition consultations and life coaching. Also, if you just want me to make up a story for you and help you figure out how to make it come true, I'll do that also. And then patreon.com/offplanet media. It's still the same Patreon from my old days with Randy, and emilymoyer.locals.com. I have lots of shows with lots of different people. I talk about lots of weird stuff. And I also do Conspiracy Cocktail, which is like a live event. And I don't know, just, I like to chat. I'm observant and I like to talk. And so chances are you can find me somewhere being observant and talking too much. So
that's the skill set we like around here. Well, everybody who's on Rockfin right now can click below and go over and support you on Rockfin. Everybody who's on YouTube, if you haven't yet, you can click over and find Emily there. And all my locals people can go over and join your community too, because we're already on all of those platforms together, so they can just hop over really easily. And I always like to ask, what are your final thoughts that you want to leave people with, or final messages to send out to the audience out there?
Like we live in I think we truly live in like the most fascinatingly amazing time. It is completely choose your own adventure at this point. I don't know if it always has been. Like, I actually think that like this sort of technology that people are kind of really afraid of, this whole singularity thing, like, I don't think we should like join up and become part of the board. But I do think that the energy field that it creates provides more opportunity for the sort of like temporal connections and spatial connections and like weird pipelines that we've been talking about to be built than have ever existed before. There's like more like strange particles to sort of project off of and stuff like that floating around. And, you don't have to care about Ukraine. You can just care about making your day, your life, and your story interesting. And, if you get a chance to go to Ukraine, you can go there and care about that. But, so, I think that's just it. Like, this is, the metaverse exists. It's always existed. It's not a new thing, right? Like, if you put a headset on, like that's the new version, is like the headset kind of thing. But there's always been more layers and more frequencies layered on top of each other. And the person who can see like the most interesting sort of like junction and vertex points and sort of be able to use those to sort of kind of project off of or bounce off of, like, or repel off of, or whatever you want to do, right? Like when someone uses a wall to run up and do a backflip or whatever, like all of these structures and like waves and stuff exist now. They're not going away. There will never be less than there are now. There will always be more. So it's just like learn to surf them, dude. It's like a fun day at the beach. It's like not a boring one with no waves, right? So
hell yeah, go rogue and fellow travelers of the path. It is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog electric concentric dose of wisdom, according to the techno brat herself, Emily Moyer. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Anytime, Lindsay. Thank you so much.
Well, trembling is the heart that beats true at this juncture of history and time where all things feel in question and all things seem up on the chopping block. It is a time of creation most purely in that we must burn away all that is not true in the light of day, hand in hand with one another. This destruction is an integral part of the recreation of something brighter and more pure than we have yet imagined. So don't believe that your trembling means that you are unprepared. You are here exactly because you are prepared. The trembling is simply your interpretation of the vibration of the massiveness of what is to come. So trust and keep true, and until the trembling ceases in the light of the rebirth, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
Yo, yo, you're lying, he's lying, and she's lying. My man over there, he's lying. You know what? You're building up a bunch of lies. Straight lies. You don't know Willie Brown. I don't believe you. You're gonna build a wall. I don't believe you. You smash corn pop. I don't believe you. You don't touch kids. I don't believe you. Tupac's your favorite rapper. I don't believe you. You're helping immigrants. I don't believe you. Unemployment's low. I don't believe you. You're gonna fix the climate. I don't believe you. You carry hot sauce. I don't believe you. You pulling troops out. I don't believe you. America is great again. I don't believe you. You don't take cash from China. I don't believe you. You pay taxes. I don't believe you. You care about us. I don't believe you. There's a virus. I don't believe you. You need to wear a mask. I don't believe you. Here's a stimulus. I don't believe you. You're gonna impeach someone. I don't believe you. Heads are gonna roll now. I don't believe you. We're gonna flatten curves. I don't believe you. You're helping black people. I don't believe you. Voting matters. I don't believe you. You never took that flight. I don't believe you. We're all in this together. I don't believe you. You don't have dementia. I don't believe you. You make the best deals. I don't believe you. You're gonna solve the problem. I don't believe you. You're gonna drain the swamp. I don't believe you. We're training space soldiers. I don't believe you. You're friends with Mexicans. I don't believe you. You're different this time. I don't believe you. We're fixing infrastructure. I don't believe you. You'll get free college. I don't believe you. Your hands are huge. I don't believe you. Erasing student debt. I don't believe you. You're not establishment. I don't believe you. You don't have Kuru. I don't believe you. You have nice friends. I don't believe you. You won't bomb anyone. I don't believe you. We don't spy on people. I don't believe you. There's a tax credit. I don't believe you. You're a Christian. I don't believe you. You'll fix the deficit. I don't believe you. The other side's the problem. I don't believe you. You got transparency. I don't believe you. You're not a puppet. I don't believe you. You don't know a Rothschild. I don't believe you. Safe and effective. I don't believe you. I'll circle back to that. I don't believe you. It's a pandemic. I don't believe you. We care about your health. I don't believe you. They're killing grandmas. I don't believe you. Birthing person. I don't believe you. We'll investigate. I don't believe you. You don't know that guy. I don't believe you. You trust the science. I don't believe you. You want us all in shackles. We're training space soldiers. You're friends with Mexicans. God damn it.